Sociology 345, Video Lecture 10. Georg Simmel, and what you read for today, The Metropolis and Mental Life. Georg Simmel was a German sociologist, contemporary of Max Weber, whom we talked about last time, I believe. And what you're going to hear in Georg Simmel are ideas that were picked up by the critical theorist who we have already looked at. And I'm sure you can see one already, this idea of the metropolis, which we described in critical theoretical terms as life in these mass societies, mass cities, where there is a great deal of proximity without closeness. We talked about the idea of the lonely crowd. We talked about alienation, despite being crowded into small spaces with lots of other people. Simmel gives us these ideas in their early form. And in this quotation that you should pay attention to, he lays out basic ideas that drive his interests in the metropolis. The deepest problems of modern life derive from the claim of the individual to preserve the autonomy and individuality of his existence in the face of overwhelming social forces, of historical heritage, of external culture, and of the technique of life. So like I said, the terms that we are familiar with as used by the critical theorists, we see them here expressed earlier in Germany. Autonomy and individuality, the idea of the individual, the concern for the freedom of the individual, and that freedom and autonomy always in tension with social forces, what Simmel describes as overwhelming social forces. Historical heritage, or the weight of tradition that one sometimes feels. External culture, the imposition of culture upon oneself. And the technique of life. What does he mean by that? I think he means the demands that are placed on us in everyday life. Just the sheer number of tasks and things, and how we have to develop strategies just to get through our day in these modern forms of living. How does the individual maintain his or her autonomy and freedom and self in the face of these overwhelming kinds of social forces? Well, one way is developing an approach to life revolving around intellectuality. The intellectual life, the life of the mind as opposed to the life of the heart. The life in which we perceive the world with a kind of distance. We see ourselves or consider ourselves somewhat slightly removed from everyday life, so that we watch what's going on and we analyze what's going on. And Simmel said this was not a new way of being, but it was a way of being that really came to the fore in life of the metropolis and became really a survival strategy in some sense, because this style of approaching the world, this aesthetic of life, preserves one's subjectivity in the face of overstimulation. It helps one create a distance. It also has an elective affinity for the moneyed economy. Money is also something that creates a distance. And Simmel wrote a lot about money. Money and the moneyed economy can reduce anything, any object valued in any way. It can reduce it to a single measure. What's it worth in terms of money? And everything has a price. I don't remember who it was who said this, but Simmel would have really responded to this as this idea that, well, everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price. Everything can be reduced to money. And so that's an intellectual exercise, as is scientific calculation, which we've seen becomes overwhelmingly important. The critical theorists later react to it. Bureaucracy, scientific management, Weber's ideas of rationalization. And a new attitude becomes very popular and very important. It's the blasé attitude. The blasé attitude develops in response to this. These are images of the modern metropolis, the contemporary metropolis, exhibiting things that Simmel was telling us about. Overstimulation. We experience it today, especially in terms of our electronic stimulation. And in the face of this, one develops the blasé attitude, the cool attitude with the sunglasses that create a kind of distance, a real distance. And sunglasses are a powerful cultural symbol of this because they eliminate emotion. They hide one's eyes. They remove the possibility of interaction through eye contact. And although Simmel wouldn't have been familiar with this term in the way we use it today, whatever, he would have responded to it, I think. The blasé attitude we can think of as the whatever attitude. And this is a term I'm sure you're familiar with. People use it all the time now, whatever. It appears in slang dictionaries and urban dictionaries, and even in our traditional dictionaries now have its definitions as used in slang form. It first starts to really appear in our culture in the 1970s. Archie Bunker, on the famous sitcom All in the Family, used it as a dismissive to his wife. And then it came to real popularity in the 1980s in what was known as Valley Girl talk, whatever. It's a term that to a certain generation, certainly to the baby boomer generation, is an absolutely infuriating response, especially when teenagers give this response to adults of a certain generation like my own. Absolutely infuriating. Because it's completely dismissive. It's dismissive of everything. It's dismissive of you, it's dismissive of the self, it's dismissive of any idea that's in play at the moment. It's much more frustrating than someone saying to me, well, I don't care. When someone says, I don't care, they're at least asserting themselves. They're asserting something, and I can maybe try and convince them then, I don't care. Well, maybe you should care, and here's why. But whatever just ends the conversation. Because nothing matters. Whatever. And this is an attitude, the blasé attitude, we'll call it the whatever attitude, that has become very powerful in our own time. And Simmel saw it emerging quite early on in response to the overstimulation of the metropolis. He called it a blunting of discrimination. Nothing matters. One doesn't need to be discriminating about anything because, well, none of it really matters. Objects and people become insubstantial, unimportant. They carry no weight. They do not affect me. Whatever. It involves acting with a great deal of reserve toward others, but also toward the self. And this is the part that I was saying a second ago that's so frustrating. Simmel described it, and I think he's right, as a devaluation of self. To say whatever is not to say I don't care. It's not the same thing. I don't care asserts a position, it asserts an individuality. I, me, I have a thought about this. Whatever eliminates that. What I think about it doesn't matter. What you think about it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter. Whatever. So, intellectuality as a response to overstimulation, or in light of overstimulation, intellectuality develops into the blasé attitude. And out of this, Zimmel identified what he called a new form of liberty, a new way of thinking about freedom that emerges from this culture of the metropolis. And he said that in this kind of culture, liberty is equated with personal freedom, and it's defined as a disconnection from others. The old idea about liberty, Zimmel called the objective spirit. The objective spirit of liberty is that one needs to be free from artificial social restraint. These are Enlightenment values. These are modern values of revolution against illegitimate authority. So our country, the United States, was founded on a revolution built on the objective spirit of liberty. To, as a group, free ourselves from illegitimate power, from artificial social restraint, to free ourselves from the English monarchy. So that liberty and freedom was essentially a group exercise to ensure that we could be free from that which was artificial in favor of that which is legitimate, the rule of the people. But the new idea, Weber calls the subjective spirit. The subjective spirit of liberty is the idea to be free from others, where we elevate the very idea of alienation to a value, where we actually seek out alienation. It's a very powerful idea. I mean, imagine this. We develop a culture because we're social animals, and we out of our social activity, we develop a culture that values that which is antisocial, that which is inhumane, alienation. So again, think of the objective spirit as the revolutionary spirit, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, freedom from artificial social restraint, freedom as a group exercise, what eventually becomes this critical theoretical idea of the individual as bound up with the fate of the group, versus the subjective spirit, which I think still dominates now, even though Zimmel saw it a long time ago. The idea that freedom is escape. Freedom is to be separate from others. Freedom is alienation. It's one of the ultimate ironies of social life that Zimmel is able to make clear. It's ironic because, as I said before, we are social animals. We make our lives meaningful through our interactions with others, but have managed to create a culture in which we value our alienation from others.